Good evening, everybody. This is the Christian Trucker, and this is my story, episode 9. I am sorry for the audio on the last video. That won't happen again, but I tried to re-record it, and I, for some reason, could not. I did not feel right about the other ones, and that was the one that I wanted to put out there, so sorry about the audio, and it won't happen again. So we left off where my brother had came back, and things had happened, and we didn't talk for 3 years. So during that 3-year period, my dad continued to work at the building supply, running it. My mom helped there, and she also endeavored into having a craft shop, and we had a game room for a little while, which was pretty fun, I guess you could say. It was interesting, to say the very, very least. So that 3 years, I spent most of my time with the kids in the neighborhood and at church and at school. You know, I was dating, and my mom and dad would have parties, and we would do fireworks out of this world. Every year we had firework parties. We had them on New Year's, we had them on 4th of July, and the alcohol flowed freely. And the parents would come, and they would drop their kids off, knowing what all was going on. You know, there was going to be drinking and such, you know, and they would drop them off and then have the gall to be mad when somebody lost their glasses or their jacket got burned up because of a firework was lit in its pocket. Yeah, that actually happened. Brand new jacket went up in flames on the dude's back. We had to stomp him out of fire. Another little kid, Josh, he came over and he got drunk at the back pond area, and he lost his glasses and got terribly muddy. I mean, he ended up almost drowned in that pond. He got so messed up. But I didn't have my license until I was 15, which was the last year before David started talking to us again. So I really didn't do a whole lot of driving. I drove to work. I drove to church, up and down through the neighborhood, but I didn't really start gallivanting until after I got my license and was released upon the world. But my parents, we had this creek. See, let me set this up for you. We had this nice brick home. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, carport, 7 acres of land, big shop on the bottom of the hill with a creek running by it. I mean, not a little like ditch, a creek with sand and gravel, and it was probably 20 feet wide when it wasn't even flooding. It was beautiful, man. I lived down there, and we were right next to the road, and I could play under the bridge of the creek. That was the best place to grow up. We had long driveways, went out the bottom and the top. I had plenty of room to ride a bicycle. Had a pond out the front door. Had a pond in between my house and my grandparents' house. See, they lived right up the hill in a big old brown wood frame house. And I could always go over there and see them. You know, it was really close and convenient. But we had that creek. They brought in a track hoe. And my parents paid this guy to dig out a big old swimming hole in that creek. And man, that was awesome. You talk about fun. We had the most fun in that hole. Now, granted, before you got in it, you had to throw rocks and sticks to make sure all the snakes and critters were out of it. Because that's right. There were snakes that would float down the creek. And it is true, they will bite you in the water. Some people will try to say a snake won't bite you in the water. That is BS. Do not believe it. A snake will bite you while it's in the water. We had a friend that was skiing in a lake, and he wiped out, and he fell into the middle of a nest of water moccasins. And he was bit like 100 times. I mean, it was horrible. He died almost instantly. It was just too much poison for the body to take. But yeah, that was pretty cool, having that creek access. You know, I could take that creek and go down behind a couple of my girlfriend's houses. You know, the church was within walking distance. I used to ride my bike down there and take my car down there. I mean, it was great. I couldn't ask for a better place to be. And my dad, he worked his butt off to provide it. And my mom, she was able to get into her craftiness and explore the things that she wanted to do, because my dad did work so hard, and he worked hard to build that business up and make something of it for the family. Many years he did that, you know, and there again, I was proud of him, because my dad did not have no college education. Whenever he went into that building supply, he told the suppliers if they wanted to sell stuff, they needed to come down there and show him the ins and outs of some of it. You know, you had to be able to figure the materials for an entire house to run a building supply effectively. So they come down and they worked with him, and they taught him a lot so that he would be more efficient at running that building supply, which was a great way to be, and it showed the initiative that he had. While my dad was running the building supply and everything, my mom, she branched off into the crafts a lot more. We started going to craft shows and selling the things that they had made. Now, Mom, she would get her about a 12-pack of Busch beer. She had a saying for that Busch beer. It's spelled B-U-S-H. And she always said it meant, bitch, you should come home. And when she was drinking it, she done had a few, she'd tell you that 100 times. But she'd sit down with about a 12-pack of them big, tall, 16-ounce Busch beers, and her cigarettes, and her wood, and her paints, and she would just paint for hours. And that's where she was her happiest, whenever she was painting and being creative. She really enjoyed doing that type of stuff. She was I guess you could say a Mississippi hippie. They originally came out of Florida. Her family moved back over there by where we live. And she met Dad down on the riverbank at a party. That's a whole good story for another one, I reckon. But they got into these craft shows, and we traveled all over the South. And it was really fun to go to these different places. It was like a paid vacation, because you'd buy a booth and you'd set it up, and you would just start selling the stuff that you made, and people would buy it. And it was a very, I wouldn't say lucrative, but it was a very good experience to be able to go to all these different places and have most of your expenses paid through the stuff you made. But in the back of the craft shop, Dad had set up a lot of table saws and band saws and all that kind of stuff. And luckily, he would drink and stuff while he was doing some of his woodworking. Luckily, he never lost any fingers or toes. We had a friend of ours named Jerry, and he lost a few fingers because he was drinking and doing woodwork. He run 2 of them across the bandsaw, and they wasn't able to sew them back on. It is a small county, and back then, I don't know if they could have sewed them back on properly or not, but one of them hit the ground, and his dog, he had a black lab, I forget what her name was, but she grabbed one of them and run off with it. That's almost as good as a story about Jason Shoemaker. He was down there hunting with his uncle, rattling horns in the bushes, and I guess his uncle had lost track of him, or they wasn't in the same place hunting. Anyway, it ended up his uncle shot him with a shotgun, thinking he was a deer. Well, his uncle throws him up in the back of the truck after dousing him in the water, in the cold water in the creek. and throws him in the back of the truck, drives him down, and shows him to just about everybody in the community before he actually ends up at the hospital. Luckily, it wasn't life-threatening, but that's the kind of stuff that happened in our neighborhood. But yeah, we did the craft shows, and Dad he would cut out all the patterns, do all the sanding, and have it ready for Mama to paint. And he would do that in his extra time. So, you know, they were always doing something. But we had the craft shop, and whenever they got tired of that, they turned that craft shop into a powerhouse. It was a game room. We had pool tables and dartboards and video games, and I really enjoyed that one. That was pretty cool. But yeah, those days were pretty awesome. Matter of fact, we still had the game room whenever David started talking to us again, and that helped him and Dad bond over shooting pool and stuff like that out there. I hope I got the timeline right, but you know, I don't guess it really matters. But all these things happened pretty much in this order, I believe. So when I got my license, now that I was able to start going out a lot more. So when I turned 15 and I got my actual license in my hand, boy, I was happy. I could go to Brookhaven, Jackson, anywhere I wanted to then, and not have to worry about being put in jail for not having my license. So I drove that old Stang for a while, but I eventually started parking it a little bit more because I wanted a pickup truck. So I bought this pickup truck. It was a 1982 F100, a game warden that had it. And it had a 302 in it, but it had been really souped up, and it was automatic. Man, that thing would fly. I was so proud of that truck. But one day on the way to school, I was actually skipping school. I skipped school a lot. I was either skipping it to work or I was skipping it to go and be bad. Well, this particular day, I was going to be bad. So we were out there around one of the ball fields back behind the schools, and I was showing my butt. I floored it, and the traction kicked in and slung me into a couple of pine trees and a light pole. I hit it up so hard that you could see the ball joints standing out in front of the truck. But we got it towed to the house, and I had two friends with me, Johnny and Ryan, I believe. Ryan was a transplant from Indiana. He come down, me and him got to be real good friends. We used to sneak him out at night when we would go parties, because his parents was real strict. But old Johnny, his parents, they didn't care. But he was already limping before we had the wreck, and once we had that wreck, he was limping worse. It busted open my knee and tore open my throat. But we got that all patched up. I had a big old tear in my throat. It was like a star pattern. But we got all that stitched up. I bled like a stuck hog, boy. I tell you, I had to walk. I sent Johnny and Ryan back to school, which they still ended up getting in trouble. And I walked to the elementary school to tell them to call my folks. And they said I was cussing when I went up in there. I don't really remember. I don't know what happened. I took a pretty good lick that day. But I mourned that truck for weeks. It was beautiful, man. It was blue. It had white pinstriping. I had it jacked up in the air with bug grips on the back. Had chrome rims, toolbox, dual whip antennas. I mean, it was the redneck mobile. I still have my Mustang, but you know, I had put so much money and time into that car. You end up getting tired of them, and you park them to the side and you go back to them, I reckon. But that's part of the joys that I have from working every day. Like I said, I work before school, after school, you know, on holidays. I earn the money that that truck cost me $2,500, and I lost it real quick like. So I went back to driving the car, and well, I enjoyed the car, but the car almost killed me quite a few times because she had a little horsepower. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in the next story, but we're going to end it right there. God bless. Keep it between the ditches.